Yeah, welcome back, viewers. Today we're diving into the heated conflict in KK. Colonel Douglas Macgregor warns that Ukraine's push into Russian territory is dangerously reckless, with potential devastating consequences. Zelensky's bold talk of re-educating Kursk people only adds to the desperation. This battle isn't just about territory, it's a test of endurance and strategy in the broader chess game between East and West. Let's unpack this conflict and explore why Ukraine may be overreaching before we immerse ourselves in the complexities of the current situation. Before we delve into the current conflict, let's take a moment to reflect on how similar wars have played out in history. If there's one thing we know, it's that history has a way of repeating itself, particularly when leaders fail to heed the lessons of the past. During World War I, Germany launched a massive offensive against France with a colossal army sweeping across the French countryside. This offensive initially seemed unstoppable. The Germans were strategic, methodical, and for a while absolutely dominant. They carved through French defenses like a hot knife through butter, surrounding them with a colossal arc of forces. The French army, significantly outnumbered and outgunned, was forced into a defensive position, retreating further and further into a shrinking pocket of resistance. But here's the thing. The further the Germans pushed into enemy territory, the more vulnerable they became. Their supply lines stretched thin, their troops exhausted from relentless fighting. The mighty arc that once surrounded France began to collapse under its own weight. The German forces, now overextended and under-resourced, began to crumble. What once seemed like an inevitable German victory turned into a catastrophic defeat. By the end, Germany's forces were decimated, their morale shattered. Now let's draw that line to today in KK. Russia seems to have taken meticulous notes from that historical playbook. They understand the dangers of overextension. Their strategy isn't about lightning-quick victories, but about wearing down Ukraine slowly and surely until they simply can't continue. The lesson from World War I is clear. A strong start doesn't guarantee victory if the war drags on long enough to bleed the aggressor dry, and that is exactly what we are witnessing in KK. By applying these historical lessons, Russia isn't merely reacting to Ukraine's attacks, they are orchestrating a slow but devastating counteroffensive that relies on time and attrition. This is a war of patience, and history has proven time and again that the side with the deeper reserves, both in terms of resources and resolve, tends to come out on top. With this historical perspective in mind, let's analyze Ukraine's current offensive on KK, and why it may be walking into the same trap that defeated Germany over a century ago. Fast forward to the present day, Ukraine, emboldened by Western support and media backing, has launched an aggressive offensive toward KK. On the surface, this seems like a bold and decisive move, but dig a little deeper and you'll see cracks in the strategy. Like Germany in World War I, Ukraine has surged forward with all the might it can muster. Their soldiers are advancing deep into Russian territory, confident in their numbers and the backing of NATO weaponry. But here's where it gets tricky. For every kilometer Ukraine advances, they stretch their resources thinner. They move further from their supply lines, which makes resupplying troops, maintaining morale, and keeping the offensive alive increasingly difficult. Let's talk numbers. Ukraine is estimated to be deploying tens of thousands of troops into this offensive, backed by hundreds of armored vehicles, tanks, and artillery units. But for every day that passes, those numbers are dwindling. The further they push, the harder it is to maintain momentum. And this isn't just conjecture. It's historical precedent. We've seen it before and we're seeing it again. Russia knows this. They are allowing Ukraine to push forward, but only to a point. Every inch Ukraine gains comes at an enormous cost in terms of manpower, equipment, and crucially, time. Time that Russia is using to fortify their defenses and prepare for the inevitable counterattack. Time that is wearing down Ukraine's offensive and their morale. And let's not forget about the cultural and political challenges that Ukraine faces in KK. Zelensky's talk of re-educating the people of KK may play well in front of a Western audience, but on the ground, it's a different story. KK is a region steeped in Russian culture, with deep ties to Orthodox Christianity. These are not people who will easily bend to Ukrainian ideology, especially after years of conflict and tension. Zelensky's ambitions may be large, but his grip on reality in KK seems tenuous at best. While Ukraine faces these growing challenges, Europe is grappling with its own moral and political dilemmas regarding its role in the conflict. Europe's response to the conflict is as fractured as the battlefield itself. On one hand, you have Germany's Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck, who seems to believe that once German weapons are in Ukrainian hands, they are free to be used however Ukraine sees fit, including on Russian soil. This hands-off approach may seem logical from a distance, but it raises significant ethical questions. Is Germany tacitly endorsing Ukraine's expansionist moves into Russian territory? What happens when these weapons escalate the conflict beyond its current borders? Habeck doesn't seem concerned, but as we know, such blind confidence can lead to disastrous consequences. Germany continues to pump arms into Ukraine with no signs of slowing down, yet as we look to other European leaders, the narrative shifts. In Italy, Matteo Salvini has emerged as a voice of caution. He warns that sending weapons to Kiev that are being used offensively could spark a broader war, potentially dragging all of Europe into a catastrophic conflict. Salvini's concerns aren't without merit. We've already seen minor skirmishes and unintended consequences of weapon shipments, and it doesn't take a military genius to understand that wars have a way of spiraling out of control when the rules of engagement become blurred. And it's not just Italy voicing concern. Many in Europe are beginning to question whether continued support for Ukraine, especially when it involves attacks on Russian soil, is the right course of action. Are we perhaps at a tipping point, a point where the war could spill over into Western Europe? The leaders of Europe may want to consider these questions before it's too late. While the West struggles with its own conflicting interests, what's even more surprising is the shift in traditionally neutral nations. Switzerland. Let's talk about Switzerland. For centuries, Switzerland has been synonymous with neutrality. Even during World War II, when the entire European continent was engulfed in flame, Switzerland stood firm, refusing to be drawn into the conflict. And yet, here we are today, witnessing a remarkable shift. Switzerland has begun to actively participate in European military projects, a move that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. The Swiss government is now supporting initiatives that enhance the mobility of European Union military forces. Let me be clear, this isn't just a minor policy change. This marks a significant departure from Switzerland's long-held stance of non-involvement in military conflicts. Allowing foreign armies to move freely through Swiss territory, that's a line that Switzerland hasn't crossed in modern history. This begs the question, why now? What is it about this war that has caused even the most neutral country in the world to abandon its principles? Could it be that Switzerland, like the rest of Europe, is being dragged into a conflict that no one knows how to end? The implications of this shift are profound. A neutral Switzerland provided a buffer of stability in an otherwise chaotic Europe. But as that neutrality erodes, so too does the fragile balance that has kept Europe from plunging into all-out war. And let's not forget the broader implications. If Switzerland can be pulled into this conflict, what does that say about the state of European security? What happens when even the neutral parties start choosing sides? The ramifications of this could echo far beyond the borders of Switzerland, sending shockwaves through the entire European continent. Ukraine faces an even steeper uphill battle in Kursk. Let's explore why. Their ambitions may be far greater than their capabilities. Ukraine's campaign in Kursk represents more than just a military offensive. It's a gamble, a high-stakes wager that could either bolster their position or send them spiraling into defeat. As Ukraine continues its assault on Kursk, it's clear that the stakes have never been higher. The key cities of Ryl-Karo and Sudzha are critical to Ukraine's strategy. Losing any one of them could spell disaster for their broader campaign. Zelensky's talk of re-educating the Russian people in Kursk sounds more like wishful thinking than a solid plan. Let's be honest, holding on to Kursk would require far more than just military might. It would require resources, time, and a level of political and cultural influence that Ukraine simply doesn't possess. The cities of Ryl-Karo and Sudzha are not mere targets on a map. They are the linchpin of the entire region. If Ukraine fails to secure these cities, their entire offensive will unravel. They will be forced into a defensive position, and that, my friends, is where Russia will truly shine. Russia has mastered the art of defensive warfare, and if Ukraine falls into this trap, they will find themselves fighting a losing battle on every front. Furthermore, the longer this battle drags on, the more it will resemble a war of attrition. As the seasons change, Ukraine will face the harsh realities of fighting in foreign territory. Supply lines will grow even more fragile, morale will continue to drop, and the cost, both human and economic, will skyrocket. This is a war that Ukraine cannot afford to fight for long, and yet here they are, pressing forward with a plan that seems more desperate by the day. As Ukraine continues to push forward, we must ask ourselves, how long can they sustain this fight? Or is it only a matter of time before they crumble under the weight of their own ambitions? In conclusion, the battle for Kursk is far from over. Zelensky's grand ambitions may capture the headlines, but the realities on the ground tell a different story. Russia is playing the long game, drawing Ukraine deeper into a quagmire from which there may be no escape. Time is on Russia's side, and as we've seen throughout history, patience often trumps brute force. The question now is not just whether Ukraine can take Kursk, but whether they can hold it. And with every passing day, the odds of that seem slimmer. This war is a test of endurance, strategy, and resolve, but for Ukraine, it may also become a test of survival.